As school districts across the country diverge on handling the pandemic, Baltimore City Public Schools are slowly trying to get students back in the classroom. Joining me now is Dr. Sonja Santelises, CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools. We also have our education reporter, Reggie Wade, joining us. Dr. Santelises, thanks so much for being with us. I know that you oversee something like 80,000 students from pre-K all the way up to 12. You've been a very vocal proponent of getting those kids back into the classroom. Tell our viewers where things stand right now for those students.
Sure, no, and Alexa, where we are right now is, I'd say, still the overwhelming majority of our families are opting for virtual learning, but we have begun bringing back some of our most vulnerable students. So some of our students with disabilities, some of our English language learners, and even some of our early learners. I got a chance to see some pictures from a virtual, actually an in-person kindergarten class, and this morning. So we've got a combination back. I would say, though, most of our students are still virtual, and we're hoping to bring even more back second semester.
I know that a large contingent of the students you're dealing with are coming from low-income areas. The technology they need to make virtual learning happen is very scarce. It's a huge challenge for you and for school districts across the country. How have you been dealing with getting the right technology into the right hands during this time?
No, you're absolutely right. And one of our major focus areas has been really shifting from what pre-pandemic was a one device per 4 student ratio to now, over the past 7 months or so, we've purchased 55,000 laptops, distributed 47,000 of those directly to students and families, an additional 10,000 hotspots, and an additional 10,000 more that are coming online. It's really forced us as an entire community, including our business partners, philanthropic community, our elected officials, to really think about internet access in a community where in May, one study said that we have close to 20,000 families in Baltimore City had no access to broadband. And what that means is without that access, many families would not have had access to education for their children. So it definitely has been a challenge. We've made up a lot of ground, but this is not only an issue in Baltimore City, but my colleagues in rural areas have talked about it, and it's really something we face nationwide.
Dr. Santelises, Reggie Wade here. What have you been hearing from Baltimore City teachers? I was a former teacher myself, and I feel that sometimes teachers feel that they're shut out of a lot of the conversation. So what are some of the concerns as teachers prepare to go back in Baltimore that you're hearing?
No, and you're spot on, Reggie. So I think one of the concerns from the beginning has been navigating technology, and I give a big shout out to a lot of our teachers because we've made great headway in that area. I think number 2, whenever you're talking about returning in person, safety is the first and foremost concern. And so beginning this past summer, we started having small groups of students back, really practicing, Reggie, what some of those health protocols need to be so that as we scale up, we'll have them in place. We've also heard from our educators and our teachers some of the adjustments that need to be made to virtual learning, right? And so concerns about screen time, about professional development time. And we have a team of some of our expert teachers in Baltimore City that have been consulting with me directly about some of the changes we will be making to virtual learning. But I think overall, teachers are like the rest of us. They want to know that they're going into a safe space. We've been partnering with our health officials here and some of the academics here to make sure, for example, that we have air filters in place. And some of our buildings, Reggie, are some of the oldest in the state. And so we've invested in air purifiers. And a lot of that has been under the direction of our health professionals. And just what it will be like reentering and reestablishing relationships with young people. We have had some real courageous teachers who actually have volunteered to come back, who wanted to be back in person. But as we increase the number of options for families, it's going to mean that we're going to have to remain diligent, even with larger numbers of students returning to buildings.
We see in the federal government tremendous gridlock. How has the state of Maryland been in making sure that Baltimore schools have the resources they need during this difficult time?
So I think it's been a combination of some of the federal resources combined with state resources. So the state, for example, allocated certain dollars for tutoring programs for young people who we know were losing ground in this really challenging time. I think, though, what everybody would acknowledge, and I don't know of an educator or a superintendent across the country who would say that we have mastered investment in some of the key elements necessary to return to school. So, for example, things like statewide testing at school sites. We've developed that in our partnership with University of Maryland, who has just been fabulous in helping us get that on board. But testing is a huge issue, and we need to have both a national and a state response that is directed towards schools. So I think everybody has put in an effort. However, I would say there is a lot of ground to make up if we're going to have our action match our words when we say it's most important to get young people back in school safely. So those are some areas where I think there's been strength, but we still have some areas that, frankly, Reggie, need to be addressed in a more robust manner.
Speaking of that national response, your name keeps popping up on the short list of possible folks to become President Biden's education secretary. What would you like to see in your position now? What would you like to see the new administration do for our country's schools, say, in the first 100 days?
So I think where we are with that, and, look, I'm focused on Baltimore. It's nice to have national conversations about things, but I think a lot of what we're focused on, when I talk to my colleagues across the country, and I think that we've heard themes about this from various sectors, is how do we come together as a country to signal that our priority is our young people and getting students and teachers safely back into schools? And how do we learn from what has occurred over the last 7 months? While the last 7 to 8 months has been challenging, there are things we know now about how to bring schools safely back online. While there's a lot we don't know, we also know, I know, for example, in Baltimore City, working incredibly closely with our public health officials, as well as, some of the greatest minds in public health at Morgan State University, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, has been absolutely invaluable. So I think that part of the question everyone is asking is, how do we bring all of that mind power together at the local, state, and national level to make sure that we really are matching our desire to have schools back in place with what we know some of those practices need to be. And I think that is true no matter what level we're talking about, even as I focus here in Baltimore.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Dr. Sonja Santelises, CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools. Good luck to you and to the students.
Great. Thank you both.